Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of Meta, where we like to cover various topics spanning across all types of genres. Before we get right into our topic today,
I'm Jimmy,
and I'm Paul.
and we're going to talk about stuff at length. So hopefully you like that about us. I don't know.
Yeah, we suck.
But everyone sucks, so don't fucking asshole. All right, to start things off, we're going to just basically tell you about what we're going to talk about in this podcast. And it ranges from anything starting video games and then not video games, which includes many categories. To name a few: movies, music, board games, anime, our interests. There's a lot of them. Mostly video games, though, so it's kind of... If you like video games, you'll probably like what we're here to talk about.
Right, but the important thing that we like to cover in this podcast overall is more so of kind of the meta of all those various topics. More so kind of covering at length why people enjoy those at a core level and how that's more of a reflection of what they might believe or like things that really stick out to them. And as far as talking about like why something is conceptually amazing, even though like at value or at face it might look like atrocious in a visual sense or a music sense or any other category you could possibly think of.
Right. Like why people like watching The Room over and over again. What do they get out of that? I don't know. We might talk about that someday. Maybe if you like The Room.
I hope we don't.
I hope not either. I mean, fuck. All right.
All right.
So yeah, we'll start things off with our pilot episode where we're going to tear apart The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening.
And what's great about Link's Awakening is that it's, in our opinion, a very underappreciated and undervalued game. And that's for a multitude of reasons. One, like, it's not necessarily... It gets overshadowed by its successor, which is Ocarina of Time, and... Which I think is right. I think the successor is Ocarina of Time.
I mean, the N64 was out...
It came out in 98.
98? Were there no Link's Legend of Zelda games in between that? I mean, were the...
No, because that was after...
Oracle games after, like 2000 or whatever?
They were 2000.
Okay.
Because Super Nintendo happened.
Okay, so there was a long gap in between Zelda games. When did... The DX remake for the Color came out 5 years after that, so it was kind of
It came out, I believe, a few months
time.
after Ocarina of Time.
Okay, at least in the U.S.,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty impressive. But basically, it's so underappreciated because A, it came out on the Game Boy, which not a lot of people had. B, it came out after A Link to the Past, which is so many people's favorite Zelda game. And not just favorite Zelda game, but favorite side-scroller, fucking map exploring, ridiculous
Dungeon Explorer,
ridiculous
XYZ.
scale of the game too. Mm-hmm. But that's what's cool about Link's Awakening is it had basically everything that you would want in A Link to the Past in a handheld version.
Yeah. And there's going to be a lot of things that we sort of talk about this, and, you know, talking about it being a first handheld Zelda, that's something pretty important because if you consider, at least from Nintendo's perspective, that you're going to take a game that, you know, has only been played on consoles, especially when it came from such a successful title, A Link to the Past, and then try to translate that into a handheld experience. And that gave way for a lot of interesting developments, to say the least. There was a lot of mechanics of that game that were just, like, atrocious. They were just terrible. If you look at it, it talks about, like... You can take the second dungeon, for example, in that game, and there's no cohesive way of or coherent way of going about it, in the sense that, like, you get to a point where, like, you actually just think you broke the game, because you're like, I don't have enough keys to open up all the doors in this room.
That happens in Turtle Rock too.
Yeah, it's terrible. And then, like, you find out later on that you have to, like, pick up pots and, like, throw them at doors. And there's nothing that, like, tells you about this in the game. There's never, like, the owl doesn't show up being like, oh, hey, by the way, you gotta
pot.
yeah, throw it at a door and it's gonna open. Like, it was never covered, ever. And it was never done in any other Zelda game at that point. And so, as, like, a new player, where, like, you exist in a time where the internet doesn't have guides for you either.
Yeah, we were like 12.
Yeah, like, you just pretty much are always like, well, what am I doing here? Like, am I just not supposed to be here yet? Or, like, it's terrible. And there's, like, a lot of times where, like, I as a kid just got stuck there and was like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. But regardless, it's still a pretty amazing game. And there's a lot of other things that go into that. And so it's a game that if you try to base it off of just, like, the mechanics alone or some of the, like, dungeon exploring techniques or whatever that they implemented in it, I think from that angle you're going to have a very bad time with the game.
Yeah, I mean, especially now with, like, the internet and game facts and stuff, anyone can beat A Link to the Past or Link's Awakening with the help that's online. I mean, if you ever get stuck, unlike in 1993, 1997, whenever you're playing it, you're not fucked. You're just like, oh, I can look it up online, and oh, I have to throw a pot at this door. Oh, I have to go back to the library from the beginning of the game, knock a book off a shelf, and then find the correct path to go in the spoilers. Remember, spoilers, there's going to be a lot of spoilers throughout the rest of this podcast. I'm pretty sure just in general, there's going to be a lot of spoilers whenever we're talking about games, movies, anything. So, yeah, you have to get the correct sequence of arrows to go in the fucking egg. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I remembered that after not playing the game for a while, and I'm like, how do you beat that game? Oh, right. If I were to boot it up right now on my fucking DS, I would not be able to beat it, like, straight off the bat. I'd have to be like, well, gotta go back to the library and write down a sequence of arrows. That's bullshit.
Regardless, though, some of the things that make it an amazing game, we want to talk about sort of, like, the storytelling of that game. And this happens in a lot of Zelda games for the most part, that it's very easy to sort of glaze over the story of Zelda. Like, it's very much, until more recent titles at least, had been very linear in the fashion where, like, you finish Dungeon A, you go to Dungeon B. And you, like, some guide is going to talk to you along the way, and it's going to be like, oh, hey, you need to go to this place next, and then eventually you'll be able to beat the thing there. And you're like, okay, cool, whatever. And so, like, you just kind of A-spam through every single chat, because, like, that's not important to you. Like, you're just here to go beat up monsters and stuff and save the day. Like, you're Link. And that's kind of what you did. But what was amazing about Link's Awakening, and I actually didn't really pay attention to it or realize it until I had recently beaten it a few years back, that, like, it is one of, like, the darkest stories that Legend of Zelda has to offer. And I think, if we consider, like, for me at least, like, Majora's Mask being, like, one of the darkest stories, or, like, the darkest story told in a Zelda title, I would say that Link's Awakening is pretty close to second in that. And you consider the fact that we have Link, who's going to wash up on this beach or whatever, and, like, has no way of getting off this island, as the story tells him, as he's woken up by Marin. And she's going to, like, about how, no one's ever left the island, but, one day she hopes to leave the island, and everything of the sort, and that would be amazing. And you kind of go on your way, like, whatever, and you run into this owl, and he's telling you about things, and it's like, you've played enough Zelda games at this point in time, if you didn't play it at a release, and, like, have had, like, later titles to experience, like, usually an owl telling you things, the owl's, like, the wise old fool who you just A-spam through, because he's gonna, like, default your answers to...
Did you miss that?
Yeah, and you're just like, oh, God, why?
Shit.
Yeah, but anyways, is that, like, you listen to him and he's telling you about, like, how, like, the windfish is asleep on top of this island, and, like, you need to go and, like, beat these dungeons, because in them are nightmares that are keeping the windfish asleep, and if you could wake up the windfish, then, like, everything would be back to normal. Like, great, okay, sounds pretty standard for the most part.
Cut and dry.
Yeah, like, nothing too, like, out of the ordinary, and as you kind of, like, play the game, and you beat the nightmares, they always kind of get their last quip in before you, like, they die officially.
It's very, like, 20s evil villain. Like, aha! Look what you've done now! You're fucked!
Well, the important thing about that is like the nightmares will always say something along the lines of just like, yeah, like if you like wake the windfish, like everything's gonna disappear, and it's like this island itself and everyone on it, and you're just like, all right, whatever. It's just some bad guys trying to like convince me otherwise,
Trying
right?
to wrestle your jimmies.
Exactly, just trying to get you like going, kind of thing. Being like, all right, they're just trying to intimidate me out, right? It's just like more plot devices or whatever, and as you kind of go through, like I think it's after like the fourth or fifth dungeon, like you have this scene with Marin on the beach, where she's telling more and more about like how she really wants to leave the island, and like she knows like one day like Link will end up leaving the island, and how she's like she'll be sad when it happens and everything, but like that's okay. Regardless, though, you before the sixth dungeon, you have to go to like some shrine or something like that, and
Spooky shrine.
yeah, spooky shrine,
Spooky.
and you end up like reading some plaque that has a this ancient story on it about how like if the windfish were ever to awaken, like his entire dream would like disappear, and like the island itself would vanish and everything. And so now there's this weird bit that exists, this contradiction that like what you as the player believed to be just this entire island, like everything those nightmares have been saying.
Yeah, just kind of bullshit. You thought they were bullshitting you.
Yeah,
They're like, you're dead. You're just trying to fuck with me right now.
yeah, and so you have like all these nightmares. Like now there's some credibility to what they've been saying, and it's like as a player you're like, wait a minute though, like but this owl though has been telling me that everything's been great so far, and that this is what we're supposed to be doing. Like I'm gonna be the hero and everything.
Yeah, but as soon as you leave the shrine, it cues the next event where the owl comes back and he's like, "Oh, you read the plaque, didn't you? It's true." And you're like, "What? What? That's what? You're an owl. You were supposed to fucking be my guide through this game." And then all of a sudden, oh, right. Yeah, everything's going to disappear. Everyone's going to die, technically. I mean, basically, everyone dies.
There's like an important part he says like during that where he's like, yeah, it could happen, but like we don't know really. And you're like, oh, okay. And he's like, yeah, it could just be like some like old time plaque and whatnot. So like maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. And you're like, oh,
that's such bullshit though. The whole time he knows the truth, the entire time.
yeah. And that's kind of like, and that's sort of like the great twist that this game has is like you go through the end and it builds you up too, right? Because like you have this whole entire thing going on with Marin where like she's like essentially falling for Link, and you have this like moment up in Telltale Heights where like she's stuck on this like bridge that's like partially collapsed, and you have to like hookshot across and save her. And there's this really romantic moment where she was like, "Oh Link, like thank you for saving me," kind of thing. Like, there's something like I really want to tell you, like, I really like ... moment. And then her dad walks up and is like, "Oh Marin, you're safe." Like, "Oh thanks Link." And then he's like, "Yeah, come back to the village." And she looks at Link and goes, "Oh yeah, like I should get going. Oh, like that thing I was gonna tell you. Oh, like just don't worry about it."
And you're like, no.
Yeah, and so you're like getting invested now because
my
like,
heart.
Here's this like girl. You're like, oh no, like no, like she's cool and stuff like that. And then like if you go back to the village and talk to her, she's like, like Link, I'll know you'll leave this island someday. Like, but if you ever forget about us, like I'll never forgive you, kind of thing. And you're like, oh man, like. That's like digs into the heart and bones and stuff. It's terrible. Regardless, though, like you go the rest of like the game like conflicted because you're like, well, what if it's true or whatnot? Like, what if this island does disappear as a result of like me killing all the nightmares and waking the windfish? And so there's this conflict of interest that it like exists now, where like you have this connection with people on the island, and you like don't want to kill them essentially, because if they disappear, you're like, I essentially just killed them, like. And so that's like what the game kind of has you riding on for a bit, where you're just like trying to figure out what is real anymore, and like is this island actually a dream?
Yeah, I mean, now that you say it that way, which I mean I've thought about it in that way, but if you think about the people, and they're all fleshed out, you've played the whole game at this point, or most of it, and there's all the villages and all the people to talk to, and like you said, instead of just going from dungeon to dungeon, there's always stuff to do in between. You are always unlocking more parts of the map that have more people, and it just feels like after that point where suddenly you have to make the choice to save them. I mean, there is no choice in the game, but as like a player, you could just stop playing and you're like, I did it. I saved all the people, defeated all the nightmares. They'll live in happiness. Link will be on a tropical island for the rest of his days. But you have to beat the game then, and that changes everything. How horrible is that?
It's it really like. I think it really hits the player at whole, like in full force. Like when you go and actually like you go and defeat the monster, like the final nightmare in the egg, and afterwards like you're on this like staircase to go up to the windfish like after waking him, and beforehand though like the owl flies up again, and then he like introduces himself officially as the like guardian of the.
Like the conscious state
of the like the windfish and like his dreams and everything of the sort. And so like the entire time this owl knew everything. Like that entire plaque set up about the island disappearing and everything, like that owl knew it was true. But you have to think from this owl perspective of like, why didn't this owl tell Link that it was true? And you have to consider the fact that like Link was the only thing external to the dream that was not produced by the dream. Essentially all the people in it, like the nightmares, the dungeons, all of that was like just this dream, and Link was this kind of like last
it was like
resort.
an extra variable.
Yeah, and the owl then realized like that the only way to defeat these nightmares and be able to wake the windfish is like through Link.
Yeah.
But the owl was probably pretty aware that Link was like falling for Marin and vice versa. And
that's why he kept it from him, definitely.
Yeah.
That's definitely why he did that.
And as a result, we have now like this owl who like knows that if Link falls for Marin and like, but we'll find out that like these people will disappear as a result, like Link just might call it quits, and then the only ace in the hole this owl had is gone. And so constantly you're like led under this guise of deception as this owl is persuading you constantly to like keep on fighting these dungeons and everything and fighting these nightmares, regardless of like what your instinct as a player tells you, like reading old plaques in some little shrine like hidden on the island and like going and saving all these people and like putting like the soul of some guy in the graveyard to rest like at his old house and everything, and like making all these meaningful connections. And then like you go and you wake the windfish, and he goes into this like monologue about like how like he's so grateful that you woke him and everything like that, and like yes, the island will disappear, but like as long as you remember them, like that's all that like they'll still be alive, or like it'll still
in
count.
Your mind.
Yeah, and
it was all self-preservation though. That's all it was. All the guise of deception and everything. He was like, oh, you know what? I want to live and not in a nightmare state. I want to be awake. It doesn't matter if Link cares about all these people. He'll wake up to and he'll remember them as seagulls and shit. And that's what matters. What an asshole.
But that's the thing about it, is that this entire like you're like, yeah, sure, like you saved the windfish and stuff, and like the windfish can go on about his business, but you have this moment of just like thinking about it where you're like, as a player, like no, like all these people I knew are dead now, essentially. Like, yeah, sure, I remember them, but like they don't exist. Like, were they just like a matter, like a production of a dream or something like that? But they had like their own consciousness and like their own thoughts and like emotions and feelings. Like, what's different between them being like a dream versus like them being real?
You know what's even more fucked up? If the Zelda timeline is like correct, and all the, you know how it's like Link's Awakening was a dream, and then he goes to the oracles, and in the oracles they reuse all the sprites for, you know, Marin, Terran, all the people in the village, the mom and father, the family who has kids. They're all in that game again. So wouldn't that be fucked up for Link to just be like, he had this whole like life in this dream and this girl he loves, and that all disappears, and he lands in the oracle's world, and suddenly like he's like recognizing all these faces of people. Like, how fucked up would that be?
It's like, It like goes into the whole entire like Majora's Mask and like Ocarina of Time thing too, where you're like, man, if that's like how it actually was, and like they were like the exact same like look and everything, like, and Link remembers that, like, man, that'd just be so
That
like
would be fucked up.
yeah, totally fucked.
You'd just spend the 3 days just like crying. You're like, I'm so alone in this world. I know you.
So from from a storytelling perspective, like it's a game where if you really sit down and like pay attention to like what's going on, like it's mind blowing. Like because you end up like not really saving anyone except for this windfish
And yourself.
like out of this dream, but like were the means like
You don't even really save yourself. I mean, you fucking wake up like in the wreck of a ship and you're like, I'm alive. Fuck. I mean, think about that. You're in the middle of the ocean after fucking that storm wrecks your shit. your
shit.
Wrecks your shit up. Yeah. I mean, ugh, how horrible. What like a horrifying reality to wake up to. As like, how old is Link supposed to be? Like 13 or something?
Something
or
like that.
10, like a ridiculously young age.
But then it's like also just waking up and like having that moment where like imagine it's like when you wake up from like dreams and nightmares like in real life and you're like, did that actually happen?
Oh my
like,
god.
That kind of deal. And it's just like sort of this thing where like maybe it was just some crazy dream he had, right? But that's sort of like a cop out kind of thing. Like,
well, then the windfish is like,
yeah.
and he does his little flyby, and then there's the seagull, which is like, oh, is it married? I don't know.
Yeah. And that's but the entire thing where like you wake up and like maybe there's this moment that he has where like he honestly wants to believe it was just a dream, and then the windfish just comes out of nowhere and just reminds him that he's just like, oh, nope, guess what? That actually happened.
Fuck you, Link. Yeah, that did happen. Wow. What an asshole. That's what we learned from the windfish, I guess.
Yeah, but then also talking like moving into how this game sets so much precedence for kind of like, we talked about like how Oracles is the next handheld Zelda that happens, and how there's going to be like a lot that was taken off of this game, and like, things that weren't carried over as well, thank God.
Pots to doors.
But like it's just such a game that set so much groundwork and foundation for, I would say, like a lot of 2D Zelda games, like this plus A Link to the Past, define so much of.
There's even stuff in the new 3DS one, Link Between Worlds. You know how there's the little shell guys?
Mm-hmm.
There's the fucking hidden shells in the game that you have to find for the level 2 sword. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
That's in the new 3DS game. That's from all the way back in Link's Awakening. That's ridiculous.
And then I also, I believe it was also one of the first Zelda to introduce sort of, like, the chain quest, the trading quest sequence as well.
Was that not in Link to the Past? Did they not have anything?
No, not a trading quest sequence, at least.
I wonder if that... Like, how did people test games back in the day? Was it just, like, within development? They were just like, yeah, this game kind of works. Send it out. 1993. Box it. June 6th. Here's your game, kid. It's green.
That's going to be, like, overall, though, talking about, like, handheld Zeldas and, like, understanding as well that, like, this was the first Zelda as well that, like, they remade, too, as well. Like, a couple months after Ocarina of Time came out in 1998, there was Link's Awakening DX. And more so that this game, like, from, like, a gameplay perspective, as we said, like, it's not that impressive. Like, it's...
Still broken.
Yeah, still broken. Like, there's a lot of things that were really frustrating in it. Controls weren't, like, as responsive as they are nowadays. But just, like, the impression that leaves on players, like, when you really think about what the story the game was trying to convey to its players, and, like, really empathetically understanding and identifying with, like, Link and his journey, and, like, how that, like, as a player makes you feel, like, creating a conflict of interest, which I think is something, like, not really done in games anymore. Like, you consider games, like, will always usually, like, have you biased towards one side, which is going to be like, the protagonist for the most part, and then you're against some antagonist who like to be like either like the ultimate evil or like some ancient like bad guy kind of thing, where you're going to have to like go and like duke it out with him in the end. And to really create a game where like you as a player, you're like, I don't know if I necessarily want to beat this, because like the ending might just be something too like sad, or like something so tragic that like, yeah, maybe it's like it's what has to be done in order to move on, but like the like pressure put on like you as a player, or like the protagonists themselves to do that is like just too much.
Yeah. And that's from a handheld game, came out in 1993. You got to think, has a game since then? I mean, like, what is that? Press X to Jason, stupid PS3 game. I don't know. All the storytelling games now that are trying to get their point across. I mean, are they even as successful as this 1993 handheld Zelda?
I would say like, as talking about things like Heavy Rain, it's obviously there's like a lot of different factors in it, right? Like, we have like an entire like a graphics standard that like now existed that like wasn't really like at the time. Like, yeah, like sure, games in those times, like they looked better than like Atari games in the 80s and stuff, right? And like that was pretty cool. But now that was never really a focusing point, I felt, for a lot of like companies. Like they put more into like the story aspect of it. They put more into like the development of the game in terms of like how it flows
The
and
feel.
like, yeah, the feel of it.
Game feel.
But it was never really a thing that came up with graphics in that time. And so, but like considering a lot of other things too, like, you have like decision making capabilities like in games now where like you can do a choice and it impacts the rest of the game, and like there wasn't enough like memory on a cartridge in the time to be able to like have like multiple events that would play out, like, and you didn't get to utilize all of them. So it's like you kind of had to work with what you had and like the space that you had in that time. And I think for a game such as Link's Awakening to be able to do that is like extremely impressive, where like you can take such a small space and like create something so moving on it, when like you really get down at the core of like what this game's about. And like necessarily it isn't about the adventure or like going and saving the day, but more so of just like this conflict, like this inner conflict that exists within Link, and like trying to decide like what is right and what is wrong, and like being able to like move on regardless of like the decision and like the consequence of it. And when you put it in that light, the game just becomes like all that much more powerful, like understanding like how much room was like given to be able to like produce and create this game, the constraints of it, and then like the actual product of like what it was.
I think it also, we were lucky that we didn't actually have to play the original Game Boy version, because I think playing a game in all green tones wouldn't have had the same impact as having it in full color as the DX remake.
Yeah.
I think we were lucky to have it that way, because even with the limited sprite palette, it was still very vibrant. And I mean, they reused literally all the sprites in the Oracle's games, and whichever ones came after that still shared the same sprite palette. But I think the fact that it looked so good, it sounded so good, it wasn't Koji Kondo.
No, yeah.
So it was a different soundtrack. It had a different feel, and the guy who did Link's Awakening did the Super Mario like Land 2, like the 6 golden coins one, with Wario. And there's actually a lot of tracks in Link's Awakening that sound really similar to that one, which I think came out later. But just the fact, we were so lucky we were too young to play the 1993 release, and so we got lucky and got to play the full color, and it had so much of a meaningful impact on us that, because you played it before we had played it together.
Yeah.
On the Wii.
And I would say that's like it's something that was also kind of hard as well. Like if you consider the fact that like it came out 2 months, the remake came out 2 months after Ocarina of Time, so like it was extremely overshadowed by Ocarina of Time because Ocarina of Time was just so groundbreaking in what it was doing.
3D, N64, ridiculous graphics for the time.
Yeah, so like it was just insane. Like, people didn't really, if like you missed the 1993 release because you're too young or whatever, and then like you didn't have a Game Boy Color or like you were just too swept up in the hype of like Ocarina of Time and the N64, like you probably didn't get an opportunity to play like.
I mean, how rich did you have to be to you had to own a Game Boy Color and an N64 and both games? That's like over like $300 back in the day. Back then, which is now over like $500.
Yeah, and like
that's a lot of money.
Especially then too when you're trying to convince your parents about like what video games are and like that it's a worthwhile investment and like because obviously there isn't as much like it's way more accepted to like have video games and play games
Right.
today like than like the stigmas associated with it back in the day. And so like when you're trying to get your parents to like, hey, can you help me pay for like this N64 and
Home
this
console? Can't you just go to the arcade? It's quarters there.
Yeah, like it's like
No.
it just didn't happen. And
$250. I want it.
And so so being able to like play that game, and so we wanted to focus on this as our first episode because it's a game that we feel not a lot of people have had exposure to. Like, yeah, sure, they've heard about it, maybe they played it a long time ago, once or something like that. But when you like really sit down and can process like that entire game and like its total value in terms of like story, considering like the mechanics, the constraints of the game, the physical limitations of a handheld console, and then like understanding like, wow, this was created in 1993 originally, like conceptually, like that is like just astounding to like consider that such a quality work was produced in such a time where like there wasn't that like as much momentum for video games or for like handheld consoles even.
You can tell they loved what they were doing. They put a lot of love into Link's Awakening. And I mean, when we beat it on the Wii, we were like, I was like stressed out after like beating it. I was like physically, emotionally, I was just kind of like, all right, we've done a thing and I feel kind of bad about it. And I was like, I need a beer. That was just like my thought.
And that's that's like such a thing, like considering the fact that like when you play a game, like you can usually beat it and you're like, all right, cool, like I beat this game, and like maybe there was some like emotional twists to it or like some plot twist or plot points that like were really moving. But when you play a game and you beat it to the point where like you're just like, I need to just sit down and process what happened. Like this was so out of left field or whatever that like I just wasn't expecting.
I mean, the fact that you get a monologue from a giant whale with wings about how the whole life you just experienced during the game was fucking put the pheasant away, you asshole. Taking it away from you, you child. You're then greeted by this giant fish with wings that you only saw in an ancient text at the end. It was crazy. It was mind-boggling. I loved it. It's one of the like most surreal endings to any video game to this day that I can think of, which is crazy. 1993 on a Game Boy. What were we doing?
Yeah. Oh my god. Yeah, it's honestly like if you haven't played A Link's Awakening, it's highly recommended. And like you're gonna have some trying times in that where like you just need to get past a lot of bullshit.
Just keep a strategy guide on hand. It's easy now.
Yeah,
it's on your phone already.
Yeah, just like make sure to pay attention to like whatever whenever anyone's saying anything, right? Like it's such a captivating story when you think about what is actually transpiring and like what is being said and like the implications of what's being said, and that it's like there's so much intentionality with like each event that happens.
There's also a lot of comedy though. It's offset by the goofiness and the Yoshi doll and like Chain Chomps are in that game. That's what's so weird about it. is that there's aspects of Mario in Zelda. There's the Yoshi doll, there's Chain Chomps, are Goombas? Goombas are in that game.
Yeah, and
they're in the side-scrolling parts.
They also have the
oh my god,
the part where in the trading sequence you have to trade a picture of like a girl named like Cassandra or something like that, but it's actually like a picture of Princess Peach.
Oh right, she was lying about she was lying on her online dating profile. I remember that. Oh my god. That whole game is like a surreal experience.
Yeah, just all of it. It's almost like
it's hard to take in.
A dream.
Whoa.
Yeah, but altogether though, this game is just mind-boggling. Like that Jimmy said that already, but like everything about it, like it's surreal. It's honestly just moving.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And the fact that it's moving, I think, was what fueled the later, like the Oracle seasons, Oracle of Time, Ages, whatever. I think that's what fueled the developers to make those games even better, because they took what didn't work in Link's Awakening, the pot doors, 420 doors, all that stuff that wasn't good, and they took it out and they put all the other good stuff, which, if you haven't played any of the handheld Zelda games, do that. Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons are fantastic, especially played in tandem, because they link together and then you get Ultimate, which we won't spoil because you can still do that if you haven't done that. That's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, I know.
Get out and play those games.
We've always spoiled all of Link's Awakening.
It doesn't matter. Link's Awakening's a dream.
But it's just like, yeah, the trend setting I think that this game had, and at the time you also consider that like A Link to the Past, like it had like its story was pretty straightforward. It wasn't very well refined in the sense, like it was just like, you know, go save the princess, defeat the evil.
Yeah, go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah,
the game's over.
Yeah, pretty much. And you know, Zelda 2 and Zelda originally like same kind of idea, and so this is really Nintendo's first attempt at like really integrating a story that has a level of depth beyond just like go save the princess kind of thing.
Without being esoteric.
Yes.
Because it was all about map exploration. So it's like, oh, I haven't explored this part of the map. That's probably where I should go next. Oh, I can't get there because I need gauntlets or whatever. And then you know you have the rest of the area you've already gone to go get the power bracelet or whatever. So that really worked for them, I think. Mm-hmm. That really worked.
I think even in future games after that, not even just handhelds, but like a lot of future Zelda games, if you consider that, like Ocarina of Time, we'll talk in a later date for one of our podcasts. But that game has like such an elaborate story that I think a lot of the players who like really enjoy it and put it up high up on their Zelda list because of like a nostalgic value. Like I think a lot of those players sometimes miss how like intricate the story of that can be, and you know, Majora's Mask obviously, and a lot of other Zeldas after that. Like the amount of impact that this game had on the entire series as a whole, and sort of the standard it created for it was like it was high. It was amazing. It was something that had not been done before, and it executed it so well that it continued like to have this effect and impact on Zelda games afterwards ever since.
Yeah. I think the release of DX around the same time was a genius move, but also nearsighted because they were like, let's try and sell another Zelda game after selling this new Zelda game. And it was like trying to recapture the audience they missed in 1993, which I think worked because, I mean, we've played it and we love it. So whatever happened for us to get our hands on Link's Awakening DX was godsend, that's for sure. So we're going to keep the episode a little short today just to kind of engage with the audience a little bit. We want to keep in touch with you. We want to know if you're liking the episode, so we're going to have ways for you to contact us, give us feedback, whether it be in the iTunes store or Twitter or whatever. We'll set that stuff up. There'll be links wherever this is hosted, which we have to figure out too. So we're really doing podcasting right. But yeah, if you like what you heard today, just kind of, I don't know. We like to know. We're bored a lot of the time, so
Yeah, or if you totally hated what you heard today.
yeah.
as
If you
well.
hate it too, let us know, and we'll either change it or say, "Fuck you." Brother." I mean, we're not gonna do that. We're very non. We're kind of not. I don't want to get in a fight with anybody over the internet. That doesn't sound like fun. But yeah, that was our first pilot episode, Link's Awakening. Talked about how much we liked it, what was wrong with it. If you haven't played any of the handheld Zeldas, you should get on that. Sorry we spoiled Link's Awakening for you. But it's been out for a long time. So, what are you fucking doing? But yeah, this was meted. You've been meted. Sounds good.
Yeah, and if you have any other comments you'd like to drop by, any ideas you think might be very good for us to talk about as well in future episodes, let us know. I'm Paul.
I'm Jimmy.
And
Bye.
thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.